The morning sun came through the window, but the room did not feel like home yet. It was a new room in a new city. Thomas sat on the edge of his bed and looked around. There were boxes on the floor. Some boxes were open, and some were still closed. He had arrived yesterday evening. The trip had been long and tiring. He had taken a train for 5 hours to get here. Now he was in the city of Rivertown. It was a place he had only seen in pictures. Thomas stood up and walked to the window. He pushed the curtains aside. The street below was quiet. It was very early in the morning, perhaps 6 o'clock. The city was still waking up. He saw a man walking a small dog. He saw a delivery truck driving slowly down the road. The air outside looked cool and fresh. Thomas took a deep breath. He felt nervous, but he also felt excited. This was his fresh start. This was the beginning of his new life. For many years, Thomas had lived in a very small village. Everyone knew everyone in that village. It was a safe place, but it was also a boring place. Every day was the same. He woke up, he went to work at the same office, he came home and he watched television. He felt like he was sleeping while he was awake. He wanted to change. He wanted to see new things. He wanted to meet new people. So he saved his money for 2 years. He applied for jobs in different cities. Finally, he found a job in a library in Rivertown. He looked at the boxes again. He needed to unpack. He needed to take his clothes out of the boxes and put them in the closet. He needed to put his books on the shelves. But first, he needed coffee. He walked into the small kitchen. It was a simple kitchen with a white stove and a small refrigerator. He found his coffee maker in one of the boxes. He made a pot of coffee and waited. The smell of the coffee filled the small apartment. This smell made him feel better. It was a familiar smell in an unfamiliar place. He poured the coffee into a blue mug. He held the warm mug in his hands. The heat from the mug made his hands feel warm. He walked back to the living room and sat on the floor. He opened the box labeled books. Thomas loved books. He loved the way they smelled. He loved the way the paper felt under his fingers. He took out his favorite books one by one. There was a book about history. There was a book about travel. There was a novel about a family who lived by the ocean. He placed each book carefully on the wooden shelf. Placing the books made the room feel different. It began to look less like an empty space and more like his space. After he unpacked the books, he decided to go outside. He wanted to see his new neighborhood. He put on his coat and his shoes. He checked his pocket to make sure he had his keys. The keys were new and shiny. He held them tightly. He walked out of the apartment building and onto the sidewalk. The air was cool, just as it had looked from the window. He began to walk without a destination. He just wanted to explore. He walked past a bakery. He could smell fresh bread and sweet pastries. The smell was delicious. He saw people inside the bakery buying breakfast. They looked happy. He walked past a flower shop. There were buckets of flowers on the sidewalk. There were red roses, yellow tulips, and white lilies. The colors were bright and beautiful. He stopped for a moment to look at them. Nature was beautiful. even in the middle of a city. Thomas continued to walk. He noticed the architecture of the buildings. Some buildings were old and made of red brick. Some buildings were new and made of glass and steel. He liked the old buildings better. They had character. They looked like they had stories to tell. He walked for an hour. He saw a park with tall trees and green grass. He saw a river flowing through the center of the city. The water in the river moved slowly. It looked peaceful. He decided that he would come back to this river often. It seemed like a good place to think. Thomas realized that he was hungry. He remembered the bakery he had passed earlier. He turned around and walked back. When he entered the bakery, a warm wave of air hit his face. The woman behind the counter smiled at him. She had a kind face. She asked him what he would like. He ordered a croissant and a coffee. He sat at a small table near the window. As he ate his breakfast, he watched the people outside. Everyone seemed to have a purpose. They were walking fast. They were going to work. They were going to school. Thomas wondered about their lives. He wondered if they were happy. He wondered if they had lived in Rivertown forever, or if they were new like him. He finished his coffee and felt ready to continue his day. He had a lot to do. He had to finish unpacking. He had to buy groceries. He had to prepare for his first day of work at the library, which was tomorrow. But for now, he felt calm. The fear he had felt in the morning was gone. He was just a man sitting in a bakery in a new city, starting a new chapter. He knew there would be challenges. He knew he might feel lonely sometimes, but he also knew that he was brave for making this change, and that was enough for today. The next few weeks passed quickly. Thomas settled into a routine. Humans are creatures of habit, and Thomas was no different. He found comfort in doing the same things every day. It helped him feel grounded in this new environment. Every morning, his alarm clock rang at 7 o'clock. He would wake up, stretch his arms, and listen to the sounds of the city. Rivertown was never completely silent. Even early in the morning, he could hear the distant sound of buses or the sound of a neighbor closing a door. These sounds became familiar to him. They were the soundtrack of his new life. After a simple breakfast of toast and fruit, Thomas would walk to work. He worked at the Central Library. It was a beautiful old building with high ceilings and large windows. He loved working there. The library was quiet and smelled of old paper and wood polish. His job was to organize the books and help visitors find what they needed. Thomas enjoyed helping people. Sometimes a student would come in looking for a history book. Sometimes an older person would come in looking for a mystery novel. Thomas learned where every book was located. He liked the feeling of being useful. He liked solving these small problems for people. One Tuesday, a woman came to the desk. She looked confused. She told Thomas that she wanted to learn how to garden, but she did not know where to start. Thomas smiled. He walked her to the gardening section. He showed her books about flowers, vegetables, and soil. The woman was very grateful. She thanked him and said he was very kind.
This small interaction made Thomas happy for the rest of the day. It was a simple connection, but it mattered. After work, Thomas usually walked home a different way. He liked to explore the streets of Rivertown. He bought a small camera to take with him. He was not a professional photographer, but he enjoyed taking pictures of ordinary things. He took a picture of a cat sleeping in a sunny window. He took a picture of a bright red door on a gray building. He took a picture of a tree that had lost all its leaves. Through the lens of his camera, the world looked different. He began to notice details that he usually ignored. He noticed the way the light hit the pavement in the late afternoon. He noticed the patterns of shadows on the walls. Photography taught him to slow down. It taught him to look closely. One evening, he discovered a small park hidden behind a row of tall buildings. It was not the big park by the river. This was a tiny park, mostly just a garden with a few benches. It was very quiet there. The noise of the traffic seemed far away. Thomas sat on a bench and watched the birds. There were small brown birds hopping on the grass. They were looking for food. Thomas sat very still so he would not scare them. He found peace in this small garden. It became his secret place. When he felt tired or stressed from the city noise, he would come here. He would sit for 20 minutes and just breathe. On weekends, Thomas tried to be more adventurous. He visited the local market on Saturdays. The market was loud and colorful. Farmers from the countryside brought their vegetables and fruits to sell. There were tables full of red apples, green spinach, and orange carrots. There were also people selling handmade crafts. Thomas bought a scarf made of soft blue wool. He also bought a jar of local honey. He liked listening to the conversations at the market. He heard people laughing. He heard sellers shouting the prices of their goods. It was a very human place. Everyone was there to buy food, to eat, and to talk. Thomas did not talk to many people yet, but he felt part of the crowd. He was just another face in the market, and that felt comfortable. One Saturday afternoon, he decided to visit the Rivertown Museum. He walked through the quiet halls of the museum. He looked at paintings of landscapes and portraits of people from long ago. He stood in front of a painting of a stormy ocean. The water in the painting looked dark and dangerous. It made him feel small. Then he looked at a painting of a calm forest. The sunlight in the painting looked warm. It made him feel relaxed. Art was interesting to Thomas. He realized that the artists were trying to capture a feeling. They wanted to share a moment in time. This was similar to what he tried to do with his camera. He was trying to capture the feeling of his new life in Rivertown. As the weeks turned into months, Thomas realized he was changing. He walked differently now. He walked with more confidence. He knew the names of the streets. He knew which coffee shop had the best espresso. He knew which bus to take to get to the cinema. He was no longer a stranger. He was becoming a resident.
However, there were still moments when he missed his old life. He missed his family. He missed his old friends. He missed the quiet nights of the village. Sometimes, on Sunday evenings, he felt a little lonely. The apartment felt too quiet. During these times he would call his mother. Hearing her voice made him feel better. He would tell her about the library, the market, and his photos. She would listen and tell him she was proud of him. After these calls, Thomas would make a simple dinner and read a book. He learned that loneliness was just a feeling. It would come and it would go. It was part of living alone. It was part of growing up. He accepted it. He knew that tomorrow was Monday and he would go back to the library. He would see his colleagues. He would help people find books. The routine would start again and he would be fine. The season began to change. The warm days of autumn turned into the cold days of winter. The trees in the park lost their leaves. The wind became sharper. People on the street started wearing heavy coats, hats, and scarves. The sky was often gray, and the sun went down very early in the afternoon. For Thomas, the winter brought a new challenge. The lack of sunlight made him feel tired. It was harder to wake up in the morning when it was still dark outside. The city, which he loved, looked different in the rain and snow. It looked gray and serious. One day, a heavy snowstorm hit Rivertown. The snow fell for hours. It covered the streets, the cars, and the roofs of the buildings. Everything turned white. Thomas watched the snow from his apartment window. It was beautiful, but it also made him feel isolated. The buses stopped running. The library closed early. He was stuck inside his apartment. At first, he felt frustrated. He wanted to go out. He wanted to go to the gym or the store. But then he decided to accept the situation. He could not control the weather. He could only control how he reacted to it. He decided to make his apartment cozy. He turned on the warm yellow lamps. He made a large pot of hot tea with lemon and honey. He put on his most comfortable sweater. He found a thick blanket and sat on his sofa. He decided to use this time to organize his digital photos. He transferred hundreds of photos from his camera to his laptop. He started to look at them one by one. He saw the photos from his first week in Rivertown. He saw the photos of the flower shop, the bakery, and the river. Looking at the photos was like reading a diary. He could see his journey. He saw how his photography had improved. His early photos were a bit blurry or too dark. His recent photos were clear and sharp. He had learned how to use the light. He had learned how to frame the subject. He found a photo of the old man who sold newspapers on the corner near the library. In the photo, the man was smiling. His face was full of wrinkles, but his eyes were bright. Thomas remembered that moment. He had bought a newspaper and they had talked about the weather. It was a short conversation, but the photo captured the man's kindness. Thomas selected his best 20 photos. He wanted to do something with them. He thought about printing them and making a small album. Or perhaps he could hang them on his wall. His walls were still a bit empty. The snow continued to fall outside. The world was silent. Snow absorbs sound, making the city unusually quiet. Thomas felt a sense of peace. He realized that he enjoyed his own company. He did not need to be constantly busy to be happy. He could be happy just sitting quietly,
drinking tea and looking at pictures. The next day, the sun came out. The snow was bright and sparkling. The city started to move again. Snowplows cleared the streets. People came out to shovel the sidewalks. Thomas put on his heavy winter boots and went outside. The air was freezing, but it felt good. It woke him up. He walked to the library. The walk was difficult because of the snow, but it was also fun. He saw children playing in the park. They were building a snowman. They were laughing and throwing snowballs. Their joy was contagious. Thomas smiled. At the library, it was warm and busy. Many people came in to escape the cold. The library was a shelter for everyone. Thomas helped a group of students find information for a project. They were stressed and worried. Thomas spoke to them calmly. He helped them organize their research. By the time they left, they were smiling and relaxed. Thomas felt good. He realized he was not just a librarian, he was a helper. He was a part of the community. That evening, Thomas decided to try something new. He had seen a flyer for a language exchange meeting at a local cafe. People met there to practice different languages. Thomas only spoke English, but he wanted to learn Spanish. He had always wanted to travel to Spain one day. He felt very nervous as he walked to the cafe. He was shy. Meeting a group of strangers was scary. He almost turned around and went home, but he remembered his promise to himself. He had moved to Rivertown to change. He had moved here to grow. Growth happens when you do things that scare you. He pushed the door open and walked in. The cafe was warm and noisy. A man with a friendly face greeted him. "Hello, are you here for the language exchange?" the man asked. Thomas nodded. "Yes, I am. I want to learn Spanish." "Great," the man said. "Come and sit at this table." Thomas sat down with 3 other people. There was a girl from Spain who wanted to practice English. There was a man from Italy and another woman from Rivertown. They were all very welcoming. They introduced themselves. For the next hour, they talked. They spoke in English for 30 minutes, and then they tried to speak in Spanish. Thomas knew very few words in Spanish. He made many mistakes. He felt foolish at first, but nobody laughed at him. They helped him. They corrected him gently. They laughed together at the funny misunderstandings. Thomas learned how to say hello, how are you, and I like coffee in Spanish. It was not much, but it was a start. More importantly, he made connections. He learned that the girl from Spain was a student at the university. He learned that the Italian man was a chef. They were interesting people with interesting stories. When Thomas left the cafe, he felt energized. His fear had disappeared. He felt proud of himself. He had stepped out of his comfort zone. He walked home through the snowy streets with a big smile on his face. He realized that making friends as an adult was difficult, but it was possible. You just had to show up. You just had to be open. Winter slowly melted away. The snow disappeared, leaving the ground wet and muddy. Then small green shoots began to appear on the trees. The days grew longer. Spring was arriving in Rivertown. With the arrival of spring, Thomas felt a new burst of energy. He wanted to improve his physical health. He had spent a lot of time sitting in the library and sitting in his apartment during the winter. He wanted to move his body. Winter slowly melted away. The snow disappeared.
leaving the ground wet and muddy. Then small green shoots began to appear on the trees. The days grew longer. Spring was arriving in Rivertown. With the arrival of spring, Thomas felt a new burst of energy. He wanted to improve his physical health. He had spent a lot of time sitting in the library and sitting in his apartment during the winter. He wanted to move his body. He decided to start running. He bought a pair of good running shoes. The first time he went for a run, it was very hard. He ran by the river. After only 5 minutes, his lungs burned and his legs felt heavy. He had to stop and walk. He felt embarrassed. Other runners passed him easily. They looked strong and fast. Thomas felt weak. But he did not give up. He told himself, "It does not matter how slow you go, as long as you do not stop." He went running 3 times a week. Every time he ran a little bit further. He ran for 10 minutes, then 15, then 20. He began to enjoy the feeling. He enjoyed the fresh air in his lungs. He enjoyed the rhythm of his feet hitting the pavement. Running became a form of meditation. When he ran, he did not think about work or his worries. He only thought about his breathing and the path ahead. One Sunday morning, Thomas decided to take a train to the coast. The ocean was about 2 hours away from Rivertown. He had not seen the ocean since he moved. He missed the sound of the waves. The train ride was relaxing. He watched the city disappear and the countryside appear. He saw green fields, cows, and small farmhouses. Finally, he saw the blue line of the horizon, the ocean. He got off the train at a small seaside town. The air here smelled different. It smelled of salt and seaweed. Seagulls were flying in the sky, calling to each other. Thomas walked down to the beach. It was a pebble beach, not a sand beach. The stones were smooth and round. The waves crashed against the shore with a loud, rhythmic sound. Whoosh, crash, whoosh, crash. It was the most relaxing sound in the world. Thomas walked along the water's edge. He picked up a few interesting stones. One was white and perfectly round. Another was gray with a white line through the middle. He put them in his pocket as souvenirs. He found a large piece of driftwood and sat down. He looked out at the vast water. The ocean was huge. It stretched out forever. Looking at the ocean made his problems feel very small. It gave him perspective. He realized that life flows like the water. Sometimes it is rough, and sometimes it is calm. You cannot control the ocean, but you can learn to swim. He took out his camera. The light here was amazing. It was bright and clear. He took pictures of the waves crashing on the rocks. He took pictures of a fishing boat in the distance. He took pictures of the colorful houses along the beach. He spent the whole day there. He ate fish and chips for lunch at a small stand. He walked up a hill to see a lighthouse. By the late afternoon, he felt tired but happy. His face felt warm from the sun and the wind. On the train ride back to Rivertown, Thomas thought about his future. He had been in the city for almost a year now. He had a job he liked. He had a nice apartment. He had a hobby. He was starting to learn Spanish. He was running. He realized that he was building a life. It was not a perfect life. It was not a movie star life. It was a simple, ordinary life. But it was his life. He had chosen it. He had built it. When he arrived back at his apartment, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. He watered his plants. He had bought several plants for his living room. They were green and healthy. Taking care of plants was another small responsibility he enjoyed. Watching a new leaf grow was a small miracle. That evening, he received an email. It was from the community center in Rivertown. They were organizing a small art exhibition for local residents. They invited people to submit paintings, drawings, or photographs. Thomas's heart beat faster. Should he do it? He looked at the prints of his photos on his desk. He looked at the photo of the old man, the photo of the rainy street, and the new photos of the ocean. They were good photos. They were honest. Fear told him, no, don't do it. People might not like them. You are not a professional. But hope told him, why not? What is the worst that can happen? Try. He decided to listen to hope. He selected 3 of his best photographs. He filled out the application form. He pressed send. He sat back in his chair and exhaled. He had done it. Even if they did not accept his photos, he had taken the step. He had put himself out there. That was the victory. The result did not matter as much as the action. He went to sleep that night feeling brave. He dreamed of the ocean. In his dream, he was swimming in the cool blue water, strong and free. 3 weeks later, Thomas stood in the community center hall. The room was bright and filled with people. On the walls, there were many different kinds of art. There were colorful paintings of flowers. There were charcoal drawings of faces. And there, in the corner, were Thomas's 3 photographs. They looked professional. They were framed in simple black frames. Underneath each photo was a small card with his name, Thomas Miller. He stood near his photos, feeling nervous. His hands were a little sweaty. He watched people walk by. Some people walked past quickly without looking, but some people stopped. A young couple stopped in front of his photo of the rainy street in Rivertown. They looked at it for a long time. Thomas heard the woman say, "I love the reflection in the puddle. It looks so lonely, but also peaceful." The man agreed. Yes, it captures the mood of the city perfectly. Thomas felt a warm glow in his chest. They understood what he was trying to say. They felt the emotion he had felt when he took the picture. It was a moment of connection without words. Later, an older gentleman approached him. "Are you the photographer?" he asked. "Yes, I am," Thomas replied. "This one," the man pointed to the photo of the old newspaper seller. "I know this man. I buy my paper from him every morning. You captured his smile perfectly. It is a beautiful portrait." "Thank you," Thomas said. "He is a very kind man." "You have a good eye, young man," the gentleman said, shaking Thomas's hand. "Keep taking pictures." "I will," Thomas promised. That evening was a turning point for Thomas. He realized that he was not just an observer anymore. He was a creator. He had something to share with the world. He did not need to be famous or rich to be an artist. He just needed to pay attention to the world and share what he saw. A few months later, it was the anniversary of his move to Rivertown. Exactly 1 year ago, he had arrived with his boxes and his fears. He sat in his apartment, the same apartment, but it felt completely different now. The shelves were full of books and plants. The walls had photos hanging on them. The kitchen smelled of cooking.
He was making a vegetable soup for dinner. He was expecting a guest. His friend from the language exchange group, the Italian chef named Marco, was coming over for dinner. They had become good friends. They met for coffee every week. They practiced Spanish together, and sometimes Marco helped Thomas with his cooking. The doorbell rang. Thomas went to answer it. Marco stood there with a bottle of wine and a loaf of fresh bread. "Buonasera, Thomas," Marco said cheerfully. "Buenas noches, Marco," Thomas replied, mixing his languages with a laugh. "Come in." They sat at the small table, ate the soup, and talked. They talked about their jobs, their families, and their plans for the summer. The conversation flowed easily. There were no awkward silences. Thomas felt completely at ease. He looked at his friend. He looked at his home. He thought about the year that had passed. He remembered the first lonely nights. He remembered the fear of walking into the cafe alone. He remembered the struggle of running by the river. It had not been easy. Change is never easy. It requires patience. It requires courage. It requires being uncomfortable for a while.
But the reward was worth it. Thomas had found himself. He was not the same man who had left the small village a year ago. That man was timid and bored. The man sitting here tonight was curious, active, and content. He had learned that happiness is not a destination. It is not something you find at the end of the road. Happiness is in the process. It is in the small things. It is in the taste of hot coffee in the morning. It is in the light hitting a building in the afternoon. It is in the feeling of tired legs after a run. It is in the smile of a stranger. It is in the laughter of a friend. Thomas raised his glass. "To Rivertown," he said. Marco raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he answered. "To the journey," Thomas added softly. They clanked their glasses together. Outside the window, the city lights were twinkling like stars. The traffic hummed its familiar song. Thomas took a sip of wine and smiled. He was home. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, and for the first time in a long time, he was excited to see what tomorrow would bring.